Now, Washington Mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. And AM 630.
Coming up on WMAL, we're going to be talking to Larry Kudlow at 8:37. Also, a discussion about how the landscape is changing on late-night television. There's some big changes coming and a lot of snarkiness over it. We'll talk about that. Brian Wilson along with Larry O'Connor.
And Brian, joining us now is our friend and the man who makes it all happen over there at the Daily Caller. Of course, you can find it at dailycaller.com. He's Tucker Carlson. Good morning, Tucker.
Oh, good morning, gentlemen.
Hey, Tucker, yesterday after the announcement of Chuck Hagel as the potential nominee, or what's the official word for it? The nominated Secretary of Defense?
He's
the presumptive Secretary of Defense?
He's the president's choice.
That guy over there doing that thing. We saw a bunch of groups there. You had groups coming out against Hagel, saying, no, he's too anti-Israel, he's not strong enough for the military, and then you had a bunch of people defending Hagel, and you guys over at the Daily Caller had a really good expose about one of the guys who's funding this defense of Chuck Hagel. What did you discover?
Right, that one of the main funders of Media Matters for America is also a funder of pro-Hagel advertising.
See, to me, that's a disqualifier right there, Tucker. I think if the same people who support Media Matters are supporting you, you should be out of the game.
Right. Well, I got to say, I'm no Hagel partisan. I don't know him that well. I do know him. And I'm certainly not an Obama guy. On the other hand, some of the criticism seems backhanded to me. If you disagree with Hagel's view on Iran, say so. But the attacks on him as a hater of Israel or an anti-Semite seem a little over the top to me. I mean, maybe he is. I don't know. And if he is, of course, that disqualifies him instantly. Well, but I don't think he ever voted to cut Israel's funding, for example, did he?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know. Have you heard actually anti-Semitic as
sure. The Wall Street Journal called him anti-Semitic.
Oh, I missed that.
Absolutely. And Jen Rubin from the Washington Post said it. I mean, and maybe he is. Look, I don't know. I'm not defending Chuck Hagel. I'm just saying it's worth having a debate over the policy rather than dismissing the guy as a hater. When, I don't know, I mean, he is a war hero and he did serve in the U.S. Senate. I mean, if he is a bigot, let's hear the evidence. But if he's not, let's just debate his policies. That's my only point.
Well, and speaking of policies, the Democrats announced yesterday that they're looking for up to $1 trillion in new revenues, and this is coming a week after we had the fight over the fiscal cliff, which, according to the Republicans in the House and in the Senate, that resolved the issue of revenues and tax increases. How do you see this playing out?
Well, I think it's demented. The Republicans have gotten an awful lot of credit for kind of going off the deep end and getting crazy, and some of that's true. Not enough attention has been paid to the fact that the Democratic Party, as a party, not all its members, but its leadership in Washington, totally in the world of dementia. I mean, the idea that you can solve the debt crisis through taxation isn't mathematically true. I mean, that actually just doesn't work on a handheld calculator, as you'll find out if you try it. But second, it would completely reorder the country. I mean, it would not be the America anybody would recognize. So that is a genuinely radical idea. Another $1 trillion in tax increases? Are you joking? I think they, should be forced to explain what that means.
I was reading this Wall Street Journal article. They went back and tried to figure out, did a little TikTok, trying to figure out how exactly things went during the negotiations to avoid going over the fiscal cliff. And they had a long conversation with John Boehner. And there was one thing that John Boehner said, I believe that he's telling the truth when he says it, that at one point during the negotiations, he looks at the president and he's talking about the spending problem we have in this country. And the president looked at him absolutely as earnest as he could be and said, we don't have a spending problem in this country.
Well, but see, that shouldn't surprise anybody, because the rest of us are foolish enough to see this debate through the lens of numbers. We see this as basically a math argument. How do we have this, massively disproportionate budget? We spend way more than we take in. How do we fix it? That's how most of us see it. Obama sees this as a moral argument. Society is unequal. Some have more than others. How do you fix that? So Obama is basically making a moral case in the middle of a math argument, and the rest of us can't see it. So from his point of view, government spending is moral, private wealth is immoral, so of course we don't have a spending problem.
Or as he likes to say, I think it's my job to spread it all around.
Well, but that is true. And so when people say, "Oh, he's a socialist, he's a communist," that sort of detracted or distracted from the truth, which is close, which is Obama is a self-styled moral philosopher who sees his job as making American society equal. So he's not a traditional socialist, but it's in that vein. He is not an economist. Like, not even close. Come on.
Our guest is Tucker Carlson. Of course, he's the editor in Grand Poobah. Is it Grand Poobah? Is that the new title over at thedailycaller.com?
I would say El Jefe, whatever.
Yes. And he's our guest, as always, here. We love having him. And, Tucker, you've been in the media for quite some time now. You started, I believe, when you were 7 years old. And
21 years, baby.
It's interesting to see how the discussion was positioned this weekend. You saw George Stephanopoulos ask Mitch McConnell, I think about 27 times, are you willing to default on the loan? Are you going to default on the debt ceiling? I mean, the media is already setting up the narrative that these radical, crazy Republicans are willing to put America into default because they're using the debt ceiling as part of their leverage. Is that going to work?
You know, it might. It might not, because the media are all powerful, though they are, as you just pointed out, truly horrible. But because Republicans may be too disorganized to summon the resolve necessary to bull their way through.
Well, what would you advise the Republicans in the House to do? Well, how do you think they should play this?
All kinds of things that they would ignore, because I'm not in elected office. I'm just a hack journalist who's accountable to no one, so it doesn't matter what I think. But, yeah, I mean, I think they have to slow spending. Not for their political fortunes, but for the sake of the country. And that's not hysterical. That's not like hyperbole. That's for real. So this is the only way I see they have leverage to do it, period.
So do you think maybe it would have been better if we had triggered the sequestration cuts that were part of the fiscal cliff,
well,
so-called?
I thought that from the very beginning. Not because they were good. Sequestration was bad. On the other hand, the core problem with America is our tax code is so progressive that the average person has no idea what government costs, and therefore has no incentive to vote for less spending.
I got to tell you, that's where I ended up. By the end of the day, I was like, oh, let me get this straight. You mean taxes go up on everyone? You know what? That wouldn't be a bad thing, so they can actually see what they paid for on Election Day. Considering
that most people receive more than they pay in, yeah. And I'm not attacking anybody. I mean, I spent most of my life in the, top, or the bottom 10%, of income. I've never made much money up until recently, so I know the feeling. But that's the point is, if you have a society where the bulk of people aren't connected to the reality of what their services cost, you're going to go bankrupt, period.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you.
Yes, it is.
Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Tucker Carlson from the Daily Caller.
Happy New Year, Tucker.
Thank you,